The evening was one of those perfect Westbridge nights, crisp, clear, and illuminated by the glow of chandeliers, spilling light onto the manicured lawns of the Bennett estate. The charity gala was in full swing, a testament to wealth and influence as the town's most powerful gathered beneath towering arches and glittering lights. Emily Bennett moved gracefully through the crowd, her emerald green satin gown flowing like liquid silk around her figure. Her dark brown curls were styled elegantly, framing her delicate features and highlighting the high cheekbones she had inherited from her mother. Her eyes, a shade of deep hazel, sparkled with the kind of quiet confidence that came from generations of wealth and privilege. Emily was the daughter of Jonathan Bennett, a real estate mogul whose empire spanned cities and whose influence reached far beyond the gilded gates of Westbridge. She had been raised in opulence, but taught the values of humility and generosity. Her mother had always said, "To whom much is given, much is expected." And Emily had taken those words to heart, pouring her energy into charitable work and community outreach. It was at one of these very events that she first met Michael Hayes, a man who would soon become the center of her universe. Michael Hayes had swept into her life with the kind of effortless charm that seemed almost cinematic. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with neatly cropped black hair and a jawline that spoke of confidence and strength. His smile was disarming, his eyes a piercing blue that seemed to hold both ambition and mischief. He was introduced to her by a mutual acquaintance at the gala, his handshake firm and his voice smooth as silk. "I've heard a lot about you," he had said, his eyes never leaving hers. Emily had smiled politely, accustomed to the flattery that often accompanied such events. But there was something different about Michael. He spoke with the kind of conviction that made her believe every word, his presence commanding, yet unassuming. Over glasses of champagne and laughter that echoed beneath crystal chandeliers, they spoke of everything from business to art, their conversation flowing effortlessly. Michael spoke of his ambitions, of building something lasting, an empire that would rival the very foundations of Westbridge. Emily listened with rapt attention, her heartstrings tugged by his passion and vision. He had dreams of expanding his real estate ventures, of creating opportunities that would not only elevate his name, but benefit communities in ways that mattered. She admired his drive, his tenacity, and the way his eyes lit up when he spoke of the future. Their courtship blossomed with the same grace and ease that had marked their first meeting. Michael was attentive, always present with grand gestures and thoughtful surprises that left Emily breathless. He would send bouquets of lilies, her favorite flowers, to her office with handwritten notes that spoke of his admiration and devotion. Dinners were candlelit affairs at the most exclusive restaurants in Westbridge, where they would sit for hours, lost in conversation and the soft glow of candlelight. He was the perfect gentleman, always holding doors open, pulling out chairs, and never failing to remind her of how beautiful she was. His charm extended far beyond Emily, endearing him to her friends and family with ease. Her father, a shrewd businessman, had initially been skeptical of Michael's rapid rise in the real estate world, but soon found himself charmed by his confidence and strategic thinking. "He's got ambition," Jonathan Bennett had remarked over whiskey one evening, nodding approvingly. "I like that in a man." Her mother, ever the gracious hostess, had welcomed him with open arms, delighted by his manners and the way he doted on her daughter. To everyone around them, Michael and Emily seemed destined for greatness, a power couple whose influence would shape the very fabric of Westbridge society. The wedding was a grand affair that spoke to both legacy and aspiration, held at St. Augustine's Cathedral. The ceremony was attended by Westbridge's elite, their tailored suits and designer gowns a testament to the wealth and power that circulated through the town. Emily walked down the aisle in a custom-made ivory gown that trailed behind her like a river of silk, her veil delicately embroidered with lace that shimmered beneath the stained glass light. Her father held her arm firmly, his expression proud and unyielding as he led her towards the man she would soon call her husband. Michael stood at the altar, resplendent in a classic black tuxedo, his eyes fixed on her with a gaze that seemed to promise eternity. Vows were exchanged beneath vaulted ceilings, their promises whispered with conviction, and sealed with a kiss that was met with applause and misty-eyed smiles. The reception that followed was a spectacle of luxury. Crystal chandeliers hung from tented ceilings, while tables adorned with white roses and silver candelabras stretched as far as the eye could see. Michael spun Emily across the dance floor, his hands steady at her waist, his smile broad and confident. "We did it," he whispered against her ear as they swayed to the soft strains of a string quartet. Emily smiled back, her heart swelling with happiness and certainty. At that moment, she believed that nothing could shatter the world they had built. Nothing could break the foundation of trust and love they had promised each other. But sometimes, the foundations that seem the strongest are the ones most vulnerable to cracks, and the fairy tales we build with open hearts are the ones most easily dismantled by betrayal. The first whispers of change began as subtle as the rustling of leaves in the wind. It started with late nights, business meetings that stretched into the early hours, real estate deals that required Michael's undivided attention. Emily, ever the supportive wife, accepted his explanations with a smile and a gentle kiss, her faith in their love unwavering. Michael would return home smelling of expensive cologne and faint traces of something floral, too delicate and sweet to be her own. He would brush off her questions with a charming smile and a quick peck on the cheek, promising that it was just business, just the nature of the game he played in the real estate world. But as the months passed, the business trips grew more frequent, his phone more guarded. Once left carelessly on the counter, his phone now traveled with him from room to room, always within reach, always locked. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them, that an invisible wall had been erected brick by brick, separating their once impenetrable bond. Her friends would offer comforting words, dismissing her worries as paranoia. "All men are busy," they would say, their voices dripping with practiced ease. "It's just the price of success." But Emily knew her husband. She knew the way his smile used to reach his eyes, the way his laugh used to come easily. Now there was a guardedness to him, a shadow lurking just beneath the surface. Emily's instincts, honed by years of observing the subtleties of high society, told her that something was wrong. Michael had always been ambitious, but now there was a restlessness to him, an agitation that surfaced whenever she asked too many questions. His temper, once rare and fleeting, began to flare with increasing frequency, sharp retorts at dinner, curt responses to simple inquiries. He would catch himself, of course, smoothing over his outbursts with apologies and lavish gifts, bracelets adorned with diamonds, weekend getaways to secluded resorts. Emily would smile and accept them with grace, her heart aching with every gesture. She wanted to believe him, wanted to cling to the fairy tale they had woven together. But the threads were beginning to fray, and she could feel the pull of reality tearing at the seams. Her mother had always told her to trust her instincts. "A woman's intuition is sharper than any blade," she would say, her voice soft but firm. Emily had brushed off her warnings back then, chalking them up to the cautious words of a woman who had seen too much of the world. But now, standing alone in the grand halls of their estate, she found herself wondering if her mother had been right all along. The signs were becoming impossible to ignore. Michael's absences grew longer, his excuses thinner. He would arrive home disheveled, his tie askew and his shirt wrinkled, details that would have once been unacceptable to a man as meticulous as him. He would brush past her with a hurried kiss, muttering about late-night negotiations and last-minute deals that simply couldn't wait. Emily would watch him ascend the grand staircase to his office, his footsteps heavy with fatigue or perhaps something deeper. Her eyes would linger on the way his shoulders slumped, the tension that seemed to ripple through his frame as if carrying a weight too heavy to bear. She would turn away, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her mind a storm of questions she dared not voice. It was during one of those late nights that she found the first true crack in his armor. Michael had left his briefcase unattended, a rare occurrence that immediately set her heart pounding. It was positioned near the grand fireplace, its leather surface gleaming under the soft glow of the chandelier. Emily hesitated, her hands trembling as she reached for the brass clasps. She told herself it was simply curiosity, that she was only searching for peace of mind. But when she opened it, her breath caught in her throat. There, nestled among contracts and property deeds, was a receipt from the Rosewood Hotel, dated just 2 days prior, signed in Michael's unmistakable scrawl. Emily's hands shook as she held the slip of paper, her eyes scanning the details with a precision that came from years of running her own charitable foundations. The hotel, the room number, the charges, all laid out before her in stark clarity. Her heart thundered in her chest, her mind scrambling to make sense of it. Michael had told her he was meeting clients, negotiating a new property deal. He had kissed her goodbye that morning, his hands gentle on her shoulders, his eyes steady and unwavering. But the receipt told a different story, one that she was not prepared to confront. Emily placed the receipt back in its place, her fingers brushing over the cool leather of the briefcase. As she closed it with deliberate care, she moved back to her seat by the fire, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the dancing flames. Her mind was a flurry of thoughts, each one sharper than the last. The Rosewood was not just any hotel. It was known for its exclusivity, a place where discretion was prized above all else. It was the kind of place one went to hide, to indulge in secrets far away from prying eyes. Emily's breath came out in slow, measured intervals as she processed the revelation. Her heart ached with the force of it, a dull, unrelenting pain that settled deep within her chest. She had given him everything, her trust, her heart, her life, and now she found herself questioning every whispered promise, every lingering touch. But Emily Bennett was not a woman who would break easily. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, a whisper of strength that steadied her shaking hands. "Never let them see you fall," her mother had once said, her voice as sharp as steel. Emily straightened her shoulders, her eyes hardening with resolve. If Michael thought he could unravel their life with lies and betrayal, he was sorely mistaken. She would not confront him, not yet. There was power in patience, strength in silence. Emily would wait, her eyes wide open, her heart shielded behind walls he could no longer breach. And when the time came, she would be ready. Emily's world began to unravel one thread at a time, each discovery more damning than the last. She became a silent observer, moving through her home with the grace and composure expected of a Bennett. But her eyes missed nothing. Michael's late nights grew more frequent, his explanations more convoluted. His phone, once left carelessly on countertops and coffee tables, now never left his side. He would clutch it with the kind of possessiveness that bordered on obsession, his eyes flickering with unease whenever she wandered too close. Emily played her role perfectly, smiling sweetly during breakfast, kissing him gently before his so-called business trips, and nodding attentively as he spun tales of real estate deals and high-profile clients. But her mind was sharp, her intuition honed by years of understanding people and their motives. She noted the slight tremor in his hand when she asked about his late nights, the way his gaze would flit away just before he answered. Her mother had always told her that the eyes were windows to the soul, and Michael's had grown darker, shuttered by secrets he dared not share. It was in those tiny fractures that Emily found her resolve, a steely determination to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. It wasn't long before Emily began to gather evidence, her movements silent and deliberate. She waited for moments when Michael was in the shower or out on his morning runs, slipping into his office with the grace of a shadow. His desk, always impeccably organized, held files and ledgers that spoke of business ventures and property acquisitions. At first glance, everything seemed perfectly in order, contracts neatly stacked, spreadsheets meticulously filed. But Emily was nothing if not thorough. She combed through his documents with precision, her fingers gliding over embossed letterheads and inked signatures. It was during one of these quiet searches that she found the first real crack, a series of invoices labeled under a company she had never heard of. Archer Enterprises, a name that meant nothing to her, yet appeared frequently across multiple transactions. Emily's brow furrowed as she flipped through the paperwork, her eyes narrowing at the sums listed. They were large, obscenely large, amounts of money that seemed to vanish into thin air. Her hands shook slightly as she snapped photos of the documents. her phone camera capturing every detail with silent efficiency. She knew better than to confront him. Michael was too smooth, too practiced in his charm to falter under accusations. No, she would need more than suspicion. She would need proof. Her suspicions only deepened when she finally worked up the courage to visit the address listed for Archer Enterprises. It was a drizzly Thursday afternoon when she drove across town, her heart thudding heavily in her chest as she navigated the winding roads that led to the outskirts of Westbridge. The address brought her to a modest office park, unremarkable, almost forgettable. The kind of place that blended into its surroundings, designed to be overlooked. Emily parked her car and stepped out, the rain tapping lightly against her umbrella as she approached the building. Her heels clicked against the wet pavement, each step measured and deliberate. The glass doors were tinted, reflecting her silhouette back at her as she pulled them open and stepped inside. A receptionist greeted her with a practiced smile, her eyes sharp and observant. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice smooth and professional. Emily returned the smile, slipping into the role of the curious investor with ease. "I was hoping to learn more about Archer Enterprises," she replied, her tone light and conversational. The receptionist's smile faltered for a split second, a flicker of something passing across her eyes before she recovered. "I'm sorry, we don't accept walk-ins." "Appointments only," she replied, her voice firm and final. Emily's smile never wavered, but her mind took note of the woman's sudden rigidity. "Of course," she replied graciously, retreating with a nod. But as she stepped back into the rain, her heart thundered with certainty. Archer Enterprises was not what it seemed. Emily's investigation continued in silence. She moved through her days with practiced ease, attending charity events and social gatherings with a smile that never faltered. But beneath the surface, she was calculating, planning, and observing. She began tracking Michael's movements, noting the times he left the house and the places he visited. It wasn't long before she began to see a pattern: late nights at the same locations, repeated visits to unfamiliar addresses. Emily would drive by occasionally, her car blending into the background as she watched him from a distance. It was during one of these stakeouts that she saw her for the first time, Cassandra. Tall, elegant, with hair that shimmered like gold under the streetlights. She was beautiful in the kind of way that turned heads, her laughter bright and unrestrained as she leaned into Michael's touch. They stood outside a restaurant, their bodies close, his hand resting comfortably on her waist. Emily watched from her car, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Her breath came in shallow bursts, her mind a whirlwind of disbelief and fury. Michael leaned in, pressing a kiss to Cassandra's cheek before leading her inside. Emily stayed in her car long after they disappeared, her heart pounding with the weight of realization. The world she had built with him, the promises whispered in the dark, the life they had planned, it had all been a lie. But Emily Bennett was not a woman who broke easily. Her eyes dried, her breath steadied, and her resolve hardened into something unyielding. If Michael thought she would crumble, he was sorely mistaken. She would find out everything, every lie, every deception, and when the time came, she would be ready. And Michael Hayes would learn that betrayal, when met with quiet resolve, could become the most powerful weapon of all. Emily moved with the grace and composure of a woman born into wealth, but beneath her calm exterior lay a storm of calculations and precision. She spent weeks gathering evidence, sifting through files, documenting transactions, and noting every late-night rendezvous Michael shared with Cassandra. Her phone became a repository of secrets, photographs of documents, screenshots of texts, and images of Michael and Cassandra locked in embraces that were never meant to be seen. Emily was meticulous, patient, and above all, unyielding in her quest for the truth. She met with Mr. Porter, her family's lawyer, in the privacy of his downtown office, a place that reeked of old money and ironclad contracts. Mr. Porter had been her father's attorney for decades, a man with a silver mane of hair and eyes sharp as flint. He listened intently as she laid out her findings, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, his expression unmoved by the scandal she described. "I want everything protected," she said, her voice steady and unwavering. My inheritance, my properties, the estate, everything. Mr. Porter nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. And Michael? He asked, his voice a low rumble. Emily's lips pressed into a thin line. I want him out, she replied, but not before he knows exactly what he's lost. Porter leaned back in his chair, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Then let's get to work, he said simply, reaching for his pen. The plan unfolded with the kind of precision reserved for military strategies. Emily and Mr. Porter worked tirelessly, drafting ironclad agreements, shifting assets into private trusts, and restructuring her finances in ways that made them untouchable. Every investment Michael had ever pressured her into was dissected, every property re-evaluated and secured under Emily's name alone. She moved with calculated grace, attending charity events and hosting dinner parties with Michael by her side, all the while knowing that the ground beneath his feet was slowly crumbling. Michael continued to play the role of the doting husband, his arm around her waist at galas, his smile wide and confident, as he introduced her to potential business partners. Emily would smile back, her eyes sharp and unyielding, masking the quiet satisfaction that grew with each passing day. She watched as he swaggered through their estate, oblivious to the strings she had begun pulling behind the scenes. Michael had always underestimated her, had always seen her as the delicate flower to his towering oak. But Emily was her father's daughter, and she had inherited not just his fortune, but his instincts for survival. Emily's most powerful weapon was her silence. She continued to play the part of the loyal wife, her smile soft and serene as Michael bragged about his investments and boasted of their shared empire. He would pour himself a glass of bourbon in the evenings, stretching out in his leather armchair and recounting his successes, the properties he had acquired, the deals he had closed. Emily would listen patiently, nodding at the appropriate moments, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She would ask questions, subtle ones, coaxing him into revealing more than he intended. Michael, ever eager to assert his dominance, would indulge her, his voice growing louder with each sip of bourbon. He never suspected that Emily's questions were not born of curiosity but of strategy. She was mapping his every move, identifying his weaknesses, cataloging his mistakes. Her father had always told her that the strongest weapon in business was information, and Emily had taken that lesson to heart. She played the long game, gathering evidence, documenting transactions, and building her case piece by piece. And Michael, blinded by arrogance, never saw the trap being laid at his feet. When the final pieces were in place, Emily moved with the kind of precision that spoke of practice and patience. Mr. Porter had drawn up the documents, ironclad and indisputable, safeguarding her assets and severing Michael's access to every dime he thought he controlled. The trusts were secured, the investments locked away under her name alone, protected by layers of legal armor that Michael could never penetrate. She signed the papers with a steady hand, her heart beating calmly in her chest, as Porter looked on with a satisfied nod. It's done, he said, his voice low and resolute. Emily exhaled slowly, her eyes never leaving the documents before her. Now we wait, she replied simply, folding the papers neatly and placing them back in the leather briefcase. Michael was none the wiser, his arrogance shielding him from the storm that was about to crash through his carefully constructed world. He continued his affairs with Cassandra and continued to parade through Westbridge as if he owned the world. But Emily was patient. She had always been patient. She knew that the most powerful victories were the ones earned through silence and strategy. And when the time came, when the curtain finally dropped, Michael would find himself standing alone in the ruins of his own ambition, and Emily Bennett would be the one holding the strings. The night of Michael's grand announcement arrived with the kind of opulence that only Westbridge could muster. The Hayes estate was transformed into a spectacle of luxury, with white silk drapes billowing from the entrance, and crystal chandeliers suspended from the tinted ceilings that stretched across the garden. Tables were adorned with ivory linens and towering floral arrangements, their petals shimmering under the glow of fairy lights strung from tree to tree. The guest list read like a roster of Westbridge's elite, politicians, business moguls, and socialites, each dressed in their finest attire. their laughter mingling with the soft hum of a live string quartet. Emily moved gracefully through the crowd, her sapphire gown hugging her frame elegantly, her hair swept into a sleek chignon that exposed the gentle curve of her neck. Diamonds sparkle at her ears and throat, catching the light with every step she takes. She smiled and exchanged pleasantries, her expression serene and composed, masking the firestorm that roared beneath her calm exterior. Michael, ever the showman, floated from guest to guest, his hand resting possessively at the small of her back, his smile wide and confident. He was in his element, commanding attention, shaking hands, and boasting of his latest business ventures. His voice was louder than usual, his laughter just a touch too forced, but the guests hung on his every word, oblivious to the cracks in his carefully constructed world. Emily watched him with eyes as sharp as glass, her smile never faltering as she sipped from her champagne flute, nodding at the right moments, laughing when expected. She was his perfect partner, his doting wife, his flawless accessory in this performance of power. And yet she knew that tonight would be the beginning of his undoing. As the evening unfolded, Michael's confidence seemed to swell with each toast and congratulatory handshake. He moved to the center of the tent, clinking his glass with practiced ease, the sound cutting through the soft murmur of conversation. The crowd hushed, all eyes turning toward him with rapt attention. Michael raised his glass, his smile wide and gleaming under the lights. "Friends," he began, his voice carrying across the tent, smooth and confident. "Tonight is not just a celebration of success. It's a celebration of trust, of vision, and of the future we are building together." Applause erupted, and Michael's smile grew even wider. Emily stood by his side, her expression serene and graceful, the very picture of elegance. She raised her own glass in tandem, her gaze locked on Michael's with a softness that masked the steel beneath her surface. Michael continued his speech, boasting of new investments and ventures, of properties acquired and fortunes secured. He spoke with the conviction of a man who believed himself untouchable, weaving tales of dominance and prosperity. The guests nodded approvingly, their glasses raised in silent agreement, their expressions filled with admiration and envy. Emily's smile never wavered, her fingers lightly resting on the stem of her glass as she listened with practiced patience. Inside, her heart drummed steadily, her mind sharp and focused. She had waited for this moment, had orchestrated it with the precision of a conductor guiding a symphony. Michael was oblivious, drunk on his own ego, blind to the threads she had carefully unraveled beneath his feet. When Michael concluded his speech, the crowd erupted into applause, glasses clinking and laughter spilling into the night air. He turned to Emily, his eyes bright with triumph, his hand reaching for hers. "We did it," he whispered, his voice brimming with confidence. Emily smiled back, her gaze warm and unyielding. "Yes," she replied softly, her eyes glimmering with something he could not read. "We did." The evening continued in a whirl of congratulations and celebration. Michael basking in the admiration of his peers, Emily poised and serene by his side. She played her part flawlessly, nodding in agreement as Michael spoke of their plans, laughing at his jokes, her hand resting delicately on his arm. But beneath her polished exterior, Emily's mind was sharp and calculating, every movement deliberate, every smile precise. She watched the guests with the eyes of a hawk, noting the way they fawned over Michael, the way they shook his hand with reverence. It was all a game, she realized, an elaborate performance built on appearances and half-truths. And tonight, that game would change forever. She excused herself quietly, slipping away from the crowd and into the quiet corridors of their estate. Her heels clicked softly against the marble floors, her posture straight and composed as she moved with purpose. She stepped into Michael's private office, the heavy oak doors closing behind her with a soft thud. Her hands moved with practiced grace, unlocking the drawer she had seen him use countless times. Inside, she found what she was looking for, the documents, neatly filed and arranged, signed and sealed with Michael's own signature. She pulled them out carefully, her eyes scanning the lines of ink, her heart steady and calm. The moment had arrived. Emily returned to the party with the same grace and composure that had marked her departure. Michael was laughing with a group of business partners, his hands gesturing animatedly as he regaled them with tales of his latest acquisitions. He saw her approach, his smile widening as he reached for her hand. "There she is," he said warmly, pulling her into his side. "The woman who makes it all possible." Emily smiled back, her eyes shining with something fierce and unyielding. She raised her champagne glass, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "To trust," she said clearly, her voice ringing out above the chatter. The room quieted, eyes turning toward her with curiosity. Michael chuckled, raising his glass in return. "To trust," he echoed. Emily's smile never faltered as she looked back at him. "And to understand the true value of partnership," she added smoothly. Michael's brow furrowed slightly, confusion flickering across his face. But before he could respond, Mr. Porter stepped forward, his posture straight and assured, a leather-bound portfolio clasped in his hands. The room grew silent as he approached, his eyes meeting Emily's with a nod of confirmation. Michael glanced between them, his expression shifting from confidence to unease. Emily turned to face him fully, her smile soft and unyielding. "I think it's time we discuss the finer details," she said gently, her voice steady and clear. Michael's eyes flickered with uncertainty, his hand tightening around his glass. "What is this?" he asked, his voice strained. Emily met his gaze head-on, her eyes unblinking. "The end of an era," she replied calmly, her voice never wavering. "And the beginning of mine." The room fell into a heavy silence, the kind that stretched painfully, pressing against the walls and filling the space with tension so thick it was almost tangible. Michael's eyes darted between Emily and Mr. Porter, disbelief etched into every line of his face. His grip on the champagne glass tightened, his knuckles turning white as he attempted to process the reality unfolding before him. Emily stood tall and poised, her emerald gown shimmering under the chandelier lights, her eyes sharp and unyielding as she met his gaze head-on. Mr. Porter, ever the professional, stepped forward, his movements measured and calm. He placed the leather-bound portfolio on the table between them, his fingers flicking it open with the kind of precision that only came with years of experience. The room watched with bated breath, whispers flickering at the edges of the crowd like sparks waiting to ignite. Emily held her ground, her posture regal, her chin lifted with quiet defiance. "Everything you signed, every document you so eagerly rushed through," she began, her voice smooth and controlled, "wasn't for investments or expansion, it was for liquidation." Michael's expression contorted, his eyes narrowing as he tried to make sense of her words. "What the hell are you talking about?" he snapped, his voice cracking under the strain. Emily smiled, a small calculated curve of her lips. "You signed away your shares," she continued, her tone unyielding. "The properties, the investments, they're mine now. All of them." Michael's face drained of color, the realization settling in like a weight on his chest. His hand trembled slightly, the champagne glass slipping from his grasp and shattering against the polished marble floor. The sound echoed through the room, punctuating the stunned silence that followed. Emily didn't flinch, her gaze fixed firmly on him, unyielding and unafraid. "You never read the fine print," she continued, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You were so desperate to secure everything, to make me sign off on investments that you didn't even bother to look. You assumed I was blind, that I was naive." Her eyes flickered with something sharp and unforgiving. "But you were wrong." Michael staggered back a step, his hand pressing against his chest as if the breath had been knocked from his lungs. He turned to Mr. Porter, his expression desperate. You can't do this," he stammered, his voice shaking. Mr. Porter adjusted his glasses, his gaze steady and unyielding. "It's already done," he replied smoothly. "Every signature was witnessed, every document notarized. The properties, the investments, they're all under Emily's name now. Ironclad." Michael's eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of support, but all he found were eyes watching with a mixture of pity and fascination. The mighty had fallen, and there was no one there to catch him. The reality of his situation began to sink in, slow and agonizing. Michael's shoulders sagged under the weight of it, his confidence crumbling like ash. Emily watched him with a gaze that was equal parts satisfaction and sadness. He had built their life on lies and manipulation. tearing down the foundation of their marriage with each whispered promise to another woman, each secret rendezvous cloaked in deceit. Emily had given him everything, her trust, her loyalty, her love, and he had shattered it with his ambition and greed. But she had rebuilt herself from the ruins, stronger, sharper, and more resolute than ever before. She stepped forward, her heels clicking softly against the marble, the sound precise and deliberate. She reached the edge of the table, her hand resting lightly on the polished surface as she leaned in, her eyes locked with his. "You thought you were invincible," she murmured, her voice low and firm. "You thought I would stand by, blind and loyal, while you dismantled everything we built. While you threw it away for cheap thrills and broken promises." Michael's jaw clenched, his fists curling at his sides, but he said nothing. His eyes were glassy, his expression hollow. "But you underestimated me," Emily continued, her voice never wavering. "I am my father's daughter. I was raised to protect what is mine, to fight for what belongs to me." Her gaze sharpened, her eyes glinting with resolve. "And I always win." Michael's defeat was swift and absolute. Within days, his belongings were packed and removed from the estate, his name quietly erased from the properties and investments he had once bragged about. Cassandra vanished just as quickly, slipping away from Westbridge without so much as a farewell. Emily watched it all unfold from the comfort of her estate, her expression serene and unyielding as she moved through the grand halls she now owned entirely. The whispers of Westbridge grew louder with each passing day, tales of Michael's fall spreading like wildfire. There was no sympathy, only fascination. How a man who once seemed untouchable could crumble so easily under the weight of his own arrogance. Emily resumed her life with the kind of grace and poise that had always marked her presence, attending galas and charity events with her head held high, her smile never faltering. To the world, she was the picture of resilience, a woman who had not only survived betrayal but conquered it. Her father's legacy remained intact, fortified by her strength and determination. She hosted gatherings at the estate, her presence commanding respect and admiration from those who once whispered behind her back. Michael, now stripped of his wealth and influence, became nothing more than a whisper of scandal in Westbridge's elite circles. His name was spoken in hushed tones, his face a symbol of hubris and downfall. Emily never sought revenge beyond what was necessary. His ruin was simply a byproduct of his own choices. She moved forward with her life, her heart stronger and her mind sharper, every step a testament to her resilience. The estate flourished under her guidance, investments grew, and her influence in Westbridge expanded with each strategic move. She never looked back, her gaze fixed firmly on the horizon of new possibilities. Emily Bennett had not just survived betrayal. She had risen above it, turning pain into power and weakness into strength. Michael had underestimated her, and in doing so he had lost everything. And as the gates of the estate closed behind him for the last time, Emily stood at the window, watching him disappear into the distance, her heart steady and unyielding. She had built her own empire, fortified with lessons learned and promises made to herself. Emily Bennett had reclaimed her legacy, and nothing, not ambition, not greed, not betrayal, would ever take it from her again.
This brings us to the end of this story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel, and may God bless you for doing so. Bye.